Trauma, particularly trauma that occurs in the formative childhood years, can have a colossally negative impact on every aspect of a person's life and can make both the body and indeed the world a very inhospitable place to live in. Trauma is highly subjective, which basically means that what traumatizes one person may not necessarily traumatize another. Likewise, the way in which people adapt to their traumatic circumstances, the coping mechanisms and the defenses that they acquire as a consequence of trauma are very subjective. So there is no one size fits all, and this needs to be taken into consideration when looking at the healing process. I mean, what works for one person may not necessarily work for another. However, there are some key areas that most people will benefit from working with. And the first one is the nervous system. When a person experiences trauma, the body activates the stress response, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And this is designed to keep a person safe. However, sometimes when trauma occurs, the stress response malfunctions. It's like as if it forgets to switch off, and consequently, a person remains in a very agitated state despite the fact that there is no immediate danger. Now, this can feel very distressing and uncomfortable to be in. So a person sometimes dissociates. They almost cut themselves off from their body because the sensations are so intolerable and move up into their head, and consequently are completely unaware of the fact that they are walking around in a state of tension and tightness. So, finding ways to become embodied, to come into the body, to be able to tolerate sensations that are perhaps uncomfortable, to be able to self regulate, is an essential part of healing from trauma. There's so many tools that are available. I mean, some people find working with the breath really beneficial, some people find very vigorous movement really, really efficient when it comes to shaking off some of the excess energy that can be trapped within the body when trauma occurs. And again, it's just finding what works for you. It's a very individualistic process. And it's worth noting as well that all of these practices need to be adhered to on a consistent basis. I mean, sometimes there's an assumption that if you try something once and it doesn't work straight away, that you just discard it. But these practices need to be done consistently in order for you to be able to avail of them when you are in a state of high agitation. The next one then is our thinking processes. When a person experiences trauma, it changes how they see the world, changes how they see relationships, and it changes how they see themselves. Frequently, people who have experienced trauma have a very low sense of self-worth. They assume that there is something inherently wrong with them, and this can result in so many coping mechanisms being developed and acquired, such as people pleasing, such as being highly judgmental of the self and others, being very critical of others, creating very perfectionist standards, or indeed acquiring coping mechanisms that are dysfunctional, such as trying to soothe the self with drugs or alcohol or porn or whatever it is that is available that allows you to escape, to numb out, to avoid dealing with some of the pain that you're experiencing. The world is perceived through the lens of trauma, and this makes the world a very precarious place. It makes relationships very difficult. It means that you're continuously in a frantic state. You're continuously judging yourself, judging others. You're continuously trying to cope with a world that feels unsafe, with relationships that feel unsafe. And despite wanting to desperately connect with others, it becomes nearly impossible because trust is something that people who have experienced trauma really struggle with. Regulating emotional content can also be very challenging. I mean, emotions can feel so overwhelming that it's easier just to numb out or to avoid dealing with them. So much of the work of trauma involves challenging some of your interpretations, challenging some of the thinking processes that you have acquired, being able to self-regulate your emotions, your nervous system, and learning to live in the body and moving moving from a space of fear and wariness and resentment into a space of love and compassion and courage and curiosity. And I mean, it is completely possible. It's not necessarily easy. It takes a lot of diligence, a lot of commitment, a lot of hard work, a lot of humility, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of courage and bravery. But life can really become so transformed. I mean, quite literally, a person can move to a higher level of consciousness. They can see things in such a beautiful manner. I think it's Peter Levine that says that trauma is hell on earth, but trauma healed is a gift from the gods. And like, that might be too far a step for some people, but it's so true, because once you have worked through your trauma, once you have built the capacity to tolerate pain and not feel a need to run from it, then pain has no power over you. You don't feel that things can destroy you, and consequently you live the life that you want to. You find a greater sense of appreciation for yourself, for other people, and for the life that you have. If you would like to work on trauma, then get in touch with me on the website, fundamentals.ie.